Tree Consulting. I'm just going to have a quick chat to you guys about the planning scheme and trees. Hopefully I'm going to make it a little bit more simpler, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of an arborist, whether it's in the consulting role or as a private consultant or doing consulting for council. So I might go over a little bit what Hugh went over, but hopefully a little bit easier to understand. I've got to keep it simple for myself anyway, so hopefully it'll be reasonably understandable for everyone else. So whether we're removing or assessing trees or assessing proposed development sites, it's likely that you'll have to comply with the planning scheme. So what is the planning scheme? Or what's the planning scheme about? Who does it apply to? What is state planning policy framework? So Hugh touched on that vaguely. What is planning policy framework? And I've just chucked this one in here, a tree conservation policy, which is unique to Whitehorse, but Hugh sort of touched on parts of the scheme that were also unique to other local planning schemes, so I thought I'd just put that in, just so you guys are aware that there are other bits and pieces in the scheme that may not apply to every council. What is a vegetation protection overlay? I'm going to go into it hopefully a little bit more detail than what Hugh did. What is a significant landscape overlay, and where do we find those? So we'll drill right down and show you the actual schedule itself. And just a quick one on what an exemption is, just very basically from an arborist perspective. Okay, so the planning scheme sets out policies and requirements for use, development and the protection of land. And there is a planning scheme for every municipality in Victoria, although they do differ a little bit, but there's one for every municipality, so it's good to keep that in mind. Who does it apply to? It applies to all people and corporations, every state minister, government departments, public authorities and municipal councils, unless they're exempted, specifically exempted by the government. So a specific exemption could be a school, for example. State planning policy framework and local planning policy framework. So when Hugh mentioned state policy, what he was talking about was that top one, state planning policy framework. So state planning policy framework covers strategic issues that are important to Victoria, and there's about 9 headings. I've covered about 5 that I think are probably relevant to us. So environmental and land values, environmental risk, natural resource management and built environment and housing. So the other 2 that probably don't concern us would be, for example, economic development and transport. So set underneath the state planning policy framework is the local planning policy framework, and the local planning policy framework is just your local planning scheme in simple terms. So that contains a municipal strategic statement and local planning policies. So in it there's things like the long-term direction council has for the use of land and development. It presents a vision to the community and to stakeholders. It provides the basis for zones and overlay requirements. So a zone might be a general residential zone 1. And outlines specific provisions within the local planning scheme. Okay, so this is the one I said at the beginning that I've just chucked in because I thought it was probably necessary, in that it just lets you know that whilst there's VPOs and SLOs, there's also might be individual schedules within a council planning scheme that just relate to that one council. So what Whitehorse has got, clause 2204, is the tree conservation policy. So this is in addition to their SLOs and VPOs. So the tree conservation policy is to ensure new development minimises the loss of significant trees, identifies techniques to assist in the successful coexistence of trees and buildings, ensures that there's adequate open space for landscaping and tree planting, and the policy itself is all trees that are of sound health, reasonable in structure and of appropriate species and are in a location that can be designed around, can be retained, should be retained, or it should at least be considered for retention. So this might apply if you're assessing a tree on a development or assessing a development site, for example, and there's no overlays, what Whitehorse will do, if there's no SLOs or VPOs, they'll then look at the tree conservation policy. So if there's a tree in the back corner by a fence that's healthy, structurally sound, contributes to the amenities of the site, they might say, hey, we're going to get the developer to keep that under clause 2204. Okay, overlay. So this is really what I wanted to talk about. So what is an overlay? We heard Hugh went into VPOs and SLOs and ESOs, which Steve's going to talk about ESOs just after me. So an overlay, it's a special plan and control for areas of significant vegetation. Okay, so it might be a whole suburb, for example. Overlays affect subdivisions and buildings and works. So buildings and works, from council's perspective, can be anything. So it can be pruning, it can be removal of a tree, and it can also be, putting a swimming pool next to a tree. They operate in addition to zone requirements and generally relate to environmental, landscape and heritage and a few other things that probably don't relate to us so much. But this, where are we? They operate in addition to zone requirements. That's what I mentioned before. You could have a general residential zone 1 and you can have a significant landscape overlay of that. So you might have GRZ 1 and significant landscape overlay 1. So the two sort of, one sits under the other. Why is this important to know? Because you have to know, if you're working on a site, you have to know if there's any overlays that apply to that site, particularly as arborists if we're looking at trees, whether it's pruning, whether it's removal or whether it's development. So you've got to know what's on that site. So where are they found? They're found under, and we're going to have a bit more of a look at this, but they're found under clauses 40 to 45 in your local planning scheme. So if you just remember that, 40 to 45, and we're going to have a look at, that's on planning schemes online, so I'm going to show you how to find that. And if you already know the overlay in the area that you're working in, you can go to planning schemes online and you know that it's going to be between, the vegetation stuff's going to be between 40 and 45. ESOs are also there, under clauses 40 to 45. Okay, so the first thing, we'll have a look at two overlays today. We're going to have a look at vegetation protection overlay and we're going to have a look at significant landscape overlay, because in my experience they're probably the most common you guys will come across. So vegetation protection overlay, so in each planning scheme there's objectives that need to be achieved. So the objective for the vegetation protection overlay is to retain and protect large trees and maintain dominance of exotic and native vegetation. So a lot of times people will ring up council and they say, listen, a big tree in my backyard, it's not native, can I remove it? Well, under some VPOs or some SLOs you might not, you might be able to. Under this particular SLO, VPO in Whitehorse, doesn't matter native or exotic, and even pitostrums, in some cases, they're protected. It's to encourage the planting of native trees and vegetation and to protect vegetation of special significance, which we're going to have a look at that as well. Okay, vegetation protection overlays. So when Hugh was chatting about do I need a permit, the best way to look at it is probably yes you do, unless you've determined through the planning scheme that you don't. So this is wording straight out of the planning scheme, so I've specifically put it up there just in case for the people that aren't as familiar with it. When you do look at the scheme, you'll be able to hopefully look back at this and say, oh yeah, I'm a bit familiar with the wording now. So a permit is required to remove, destroy or lop vegetation, having a single trunk circumference of 1 metre or more at 1 metre above ground level. So 1 metre trunk circumference is 32 centimetres DBH. So anything above that, then a permit is going to be required under this overlay. If it's below that, you're probably not going to need a permit. Yep?
What other government bodies can override that metre circumference?
Probably none, unless council applies to have the scheme changed.
Or as you say, Victoria?
That's where exemptions come in. Yeah, so that's where your exemptions come in. So when you're talking about overriding, you're actually talking about exemptions. So it could be emergency works. So there's an exemption in the parent clause that, if a tree's dead, dying or dangerous, if it's interfering with electrical equipment or some sort of services, it can probably be removed. So what you're talking about is exemptions there, which I won't go into in the parent clause, but Hugh did have it up, so we'll go into more exemptions, basic exemptions in the actual schedule itself. So it'd be a case of looking at your table of exemptions. So where was I up to? So I have single trunk circumference at 1 metre, 1 metre circumference, 1 metre at height. So anything below that you probably wouldn't need a permit. Okay, so this is really when you determine whether or not, as an arborist on the ground, whether or not a permit is actually needed. So in this case, a permit, a permit, this tree does not apply to any vegetation which is deemed unsafe by a suitably qualified arborist and to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. Just satisfaction of the responsible authority, just keep that in mind, because that's an interesting one. Being pruned for regeneration or ornamental shaping, which can be considered a few ways. A tree which is dead or dying, which I've mentioned, and a tree being maintained in accordance with a tree management program. So when I was working at Whitehorse, they endorsed a number of tree management programs for VPO trees where there was a number of them on the site. So what that means is basically the arborist can go in and prune them and assess them without the need for a permit over, say, a 5-year period, if that's what the tree management program is. So that's actually what that means. Different VPOs have different requirements. So instead of a blanket VPO, so a blanket VPO will be a whole area. So let's say Mont Albert North, for example. Some VPOs can be associated with single sites only, so it can be one site in an area, and associated with a significant tree study or both. All right, so I think significant tree study slide is next. So what that means is you effectively you've got two VPOs on the one site. So you've got an area VPO and you've got an individual VPO, right? And they've probably both, when you drill down, got different requirements for the need for a permit. They'll have different objectives. They'll have different permit requirements, and you need to look at each individual statement or schedule. So if you've got two, let's say it's a VPO1 and a VPO3, have a look at your VPO1 schedule and have a look at your VPO3 schedule and see what the requirements are for, say, removal and pruning. So that's when just go back. So your significant tree study, that's what the statement of significance will look at. So I don't know how clear that is. I apologise if it's not too clear. What that does is that identifies two trees that are considered to be significant within an area, and those two trees there, they have the VPO on them. So the site itself doesn't, so these other trees here don't, but these two do. So that's when your triggers for acquiring a permit will kick in if you're going to go start working on them, or you want to remove them, or whatever. And this here again, it's not clear, really sorry. This here is your schedule. I think it's supposed to be a VPO. So this is what you'll actually find in the planning scheme. So when you're looking in the planning scheme, this is what you'll actually see. So you've got your objectives there. That's where it says permit required, move, destroy or log, and then you've I suppose you've got your exemptions there. That's the way I look at them. Apologies if I'm moving a bit quick. I know Steve's on next. So there were VPOs. So these are SLOs, so significant landscape overlays. So these are going to be different. These are predominantly area. So VPO, area, and individual trees. SLOs generally a whole area. So and there could be more than one. So in Whitehorse, for example, there's SLO 1 through to SLO 8, and each one of them might have different requirements. And like the slide says here, probably the most common one you'll come across. Okay, the purpose is to identify significant landscapes, so that's where your area comes in, and to conserve and enhance the character of significant landscapes over an area. A trigger, so this is Whitehorse. A permit is required to remove, destroy or lop. Notice the wording and the language is the same for the SLO as it is the VPO, remove, destroy or lop. A tree that has a single trunk circumference of 0.5 of a metre. So VPO, that last VPO we looked at, I think VPO 2, that was 1 metre. Okay, so this is now smaller. So you can move from one suburb and have one requirement that triggers a permit. You can move into the next suburb in the same municipality and have a different trigger. So it's really, really important that you look at what overlays are over what sites. So this one, a tree that has a single trunk circumference 0.5, like I said, with 16 centimetres dBH, or less at a height of 1 metre above ground level. Pruning for regeneration or ornamental shaping. It could be interpreted in a number of ways. I see a few people smiling. You know, you might look at that and think, well, you know, oh, that's a crown reduction or a weight reduction I'm doing in accordance with Australian standards for pruning, so I don't think it needs a permit, for example, but you check with council and you might word a report to reflect regeneration, or you might put ornamental shaping in there. A tree which is dead or dying to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. Again, responsible authority, just keep that in mind because we're going to look at that in a minute with another overlay. We're going to look at it right now, actually. Comparing to SLO triggers. So what I've done is I've had a look at Whitehorse, and now we'll have a look at Maroondah, the two triggers, all right? So this one here is the Maroondah requirement for a permit. So this does not apply to a tree having a single trunk circumference. So again, it's 1 metre. And they've actually put 16 centimetres in it, which is really good for arborists, so it's good thinking by Maroondah, at a height of 1 metre above ground level, or that is less than 5 metres in height. So not only does Maroondah have a DBH trigger, but they also have a height trigger as well. So you can already see that that's probably a little bit more involved in that than what there is in the Whitehorse one, where it's just a circumference trigger. So this is also a height trigger. Pruning of a tree for regeneration or ornamental shaping, which is the same. Now this is the interesting one that I wanted to sort of draw everyone's attention to. A tree which is dead, dying, or has become dangerous, as declared by a suitably qualified person. So what's missing there is not to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. So as an arborist, if you do a report in Whitehorse, for example, and you say this tree is dead or dying and doesn't require a permit, well, council will determine whether or not it requires a permit. So even if we as arborists say it's dead or dying, the council still need to say, yes, we agree it's dead or dying, no permit required. With Maroondah, technically, and I'm not telling people to do this, you always check with council, always. I'm not just saying that because Paul's in the room. You always check with council. But technically speaking, as an arborist, if you say a tree is dead, dying or dangerous in Maroondah, you write it down in a report. Technically, you don't need a permit to remove that tree, right, technically. But always check with council. I always check with council. It's good just to let them know what you're doing and get their feedback from it as well. This is also a really good one, a tree within 3 metres of an existing house or other buildings. So that's an external wall of a dwelling. This is really good. It's very smart for Maroondah to have that in, because like many people in this room, I've written reports with trees that are that far from external walls of dwellings, and you've got to go right into cracking and all that sort of stuff. So this probably saves Maroondah quite a lot of work, so it's a pretty smart little exemption to have in the scheme.
Which part of the tree?
What's that? Trunk, Paul?
Doesn't say that.
Yep. Yeah, not the edge of the canopy, and the trunk's 15 metres away. So, but very, very good question. Very good question. So SLO's continued. So what I did is I thought I'll just put this in, and we'll have a look at it from a development perspective, just very quickly. So planning, development application. So the landscape character objectives are what your or a development will be assessed against when a development application is put into council, and your arborist report will play a key role in that. So the objectives is to retain the dominance of vegetation cover, to encourage the retention and regeneration of native vegetation, space free for planting, and sympathetic buildings within an envelope that ensures tree-dominated landscape. So if you're doing a report that goes in with the development application, these are the sorts of things council will look at. If you say a tree needs to come out, council will look at that and say, hey, actually no, the tree in the back corner actually meets these objectives, so we want to keep it. So it's just one thing to keep in mind. So if you think a tree can be retained on a development site, keep it. Exemptions. So we've talked about exemptions as we've gone through, but I've just put this up very quickly. Buildings and works are exempt from requiring a permit for the removal of a tree if it's been declared dead, dying or dangerous to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. That's just one. Whitehorse planning scheme, and that's just what I was chatting about before. No to the satisfaction of the responsible authority in the Maroondah one. So you can see the differences there. Going to Whitehorse, say a tree's dead, doesn't matter what you say, council has to approve it. Going to Maroondah, potentially doesn't have to be approved by council, but you would let them know, have a chat to them. They're all very nice there. So this is what you'd see in the planning scheme. This is your permit required. So a permit is required to remove, destroy. So this is actually what's in the permit. So when you're looking up the permit, this is the sort of thing you're looking for. Well, looking up the planning scheme, this is the sort of thing you're looking for. Okay, very, very quickly, we're not going to go into them. Other overlays and tree controls that might apply to a site. There can be heritage overlays specifically for trees. So you might have vegetation protection overlay area, you might have vegetation protection overlay individual tree, and you might have a heritage overlay. So I think you'd be pretty unlucky to have all three on a site, but potentially it could happen. It could happen. So those are the other sorts of things you've got to look at, which we're going to work at. We're going to have a look at how to find that. Local laws, that's Bayside's local law. Hugh touched on that. Burundara also has a local law. So while there might not be an overlay over a site, doesn't mean that you don't need a permit, because a local law permit might be required to remove a tree. And 5217, which you mentioned, I'm not even going to get into that. I try and stay away from 5217. It's an ecologist's job. It's too complicated in my opinion, and it's been simplified. So, all right, where do you find the planning scheme you want to look at, or the overlay you want to look at? So there's a few places. So planning schemes online, and that's what Hugh was using. He was using planning schemes online. You can go to the individual planning scheme. So Whitehorse planning schemes online. If you know what the overlay is, you just go bang, look it up. That's the overlay. I know it's between 40 and clause 40 and 45, so I'll be able to find it. Again, exactly the same. You just go to Maroondah planning schemes online. Really easy to use. This really easy to use. And now, if you don't know what the overlay is, and this is probably this is probably key. Before we have a look at that, that's planning schemes online. So that's the top of that's what you're going to see, and that's what Hugh had. And all you do is you scroll down, and you'll have your individual councils and your SLOs and VPOs underneath that. So it's pretty easy to find. So this is the main one, and this is probably what most people that look at overlays are most familiar with, which is land.vic.gov.au. So what you do is you jump onto the website, and this is what you're going to see, all right? Over here you put your address in, you hit search, there's your address. This is your address that comes up, so you've put that in the address, that one there. This is your address comes up. This is the way I do it. Other people do it differently. Hit get reports. This screen will come up. So again, you've got your address there. That's the address I want. You hit next. This is the next screen that comes up. So there's a few screens. It's a little bit of probably 4 or 5 screens you've got to go through. And what I always do is I just click onto this planning property report, because it's free pretty much is why I do it. You hit view, and this is what comes up. So this is only the section for your planning overlay. So you'll have your zones in there as well. But if I want to know what overlay's on the site, this will tell me Vegetation Protection Overlay Schedule 2. All right, so that's the one I want, the VPO2. So I click on VPO2, and then I've got the schedule. All right, and then you can say that little snippet I had before of permit requirements. So that's it there. So everything's pretty easy to find, and that's probably the section you probably want to look at. But it's good to look through them in any way and be familiar with them. The other way of doing it is you can hit the information button. So you've got your address up, you hit the information button, you click on your address, and what comes up are details about the site itself. So either. I prefer that one because it gives me the overlay. It tells you what I need to do, but you can use that one as well. And I think, are these slides going to be available?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So there's all the information anyway.
Just let me duck in.
Are we going to do a live demo?
I think so.
I have to get my pad.
Fingers crossed.
I have to get my pad because I've researched it. So I've just been told there's a mobile app for all this as well, which I was unaware of. Cam's doing a talk later. Maybe Cam can give us a bit of a...
It's called Planning Vic.
Planning Vic, there you go.
Planning Vic. Planning maps online.
I don't have any glasses with me when I'm out in the field, so it's probably no good to me. That's why I print everything off.
I'm going to type in, what address are we typing in?
So we're typing in 437
437.
Belmore Road.
And it's case sensitive, cap sensitive, I think.
Yeah,
What,
Mont Albert North, mate.
Search. Waiting.
Put that down.
Get report.
Yep.
Create report. Push another button. Open report. Read report.
And there you go. So there's your planning property report. And if Shane
And
scrolls
we just scroll down and it'll show us every overlay that's attached to the site. And in that case, there's not that many.
So if you go up and you hit on, scroll down,
Yep.
hit on Vegetation Protection Overlay,
Yep. Bang.
bang. And don't do what I first did when I started using it. It's got zones and overlays or overlays nearby, so they might not be affecting the property, but I've looked at it and I've gone, oh God, there's a heritage overlay, but realising that there wasn't, so you just need to have a look at it. So that's it there. So it's really easy to use. You get your schedule, and then you're able to work out what the requirements for the site are if you're going to do an assessment for a tree removal or pruning, regeneration or ornamental shaping, and then you might not need a permit.
So we say thank you to Shannon Brown.